The first chord he played made time stop. Not metaphorically, not poetically. It actually stopped people in their tracks. Mid-step, mid-conversation, mid-breath. The sound that spilled out of that battered, dusty guitar case didn't belong to the man holding it. It was too clean, too alive, too painfully beautiful to come from someone who looked like he hadn't eaten properly in days. For a moment, the noise of the city faded into nothing. And that was exactly what he wanted. If you believe that kindness can change lives, that people deserve second chances, and that sometimes the greatest stories are hidden behind the most ordinary faces. Take a second right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a prank, it's something far deeper. He sat on the cold pavement, his back leaning against a worn-out brick wall, a threadbare coat wrapped around his shoulders. His shoes were scuffed, one slightly torn at the toe, and his cap sat low, hiding most of his face. To anyone passing by, he was just another invisible man in a busy city, someone people had trained themselves not to see. But beneath the dirt, beneath the disguise, beneath the quiet stillness, was one of the most talented guitarists the world had ever seen. A man who had once played on grand stages, under golden lights, in front of thousands. A man who had once been applauded until his hands hurt more than his fingers ever did. Now he was waiting, waiting for someone to stop, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to care. The first few minutes were exactly what he expected. People walked past without a glance, their eyes glued to phones, their minds tangled in their own worries. Some noticed him briefly, but quickly looked away, as if acknowledging his existence would somehow demand something from them. He began to play again, this time softer, slower. A melody that felt like a memory you couldn't quite place, but somehow missed. A woman pushing a stroller slowed down, her steps unconsciously matching the rhythm. A man in a suit hesitated for just a second before continuing on, though his head turned slightly, as if something had tugged at him. Two teenagers glanced over, whispering to each other, unsure whether to laugh or listen. Then it happened. A note bent just enough to feel like a sigh. Another that rose like hope. And suddenly, the invisible man was no longer invisible. A small crowd began to form. Not large, not overwhelming, but enough to feel the shift. Enough to feel curiosity replacing indifference. Among them stood two young women, their reactions almost identical, eyes wide, hands instinctively covering their mouths, as if they had just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. They weren't shocked because a homeless man was playing guitar. They were shocked because he was playing like a legend. The guitarist kept his head down, letting the music speak for him. Each chord carried something deeper than skill. It carried pain, resilience, and something almost like forgiveness. The kind of sound that didn't just entertain, but reached into people and stirred something long forgotten. Coins began to drop into the open guitar case. A few at first, then more. Not out of pity, but out of respect. One man crouched slightly, watching closely, trying to understand how someone in such circumstances could possess such mastery. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking questions that had no easy answer. Even those who didn't stop fully slowed down, their ears refusing to let them walk away completely. And yet, for all the attention, something was missing. He could feel it. He wasn't just testing whether people would notice talent. He was testing whether people would notice humanity. Minutes turned into nearly an hour, and the crowd shifted like waves, some leaving, others arriving, but always maintaining a quiet circle around him. The air had changed. There was a shared stillness, a fragile connection formed through sound alone. Then, through the crowd, someone stepped forward. An older man, his clothes simple but clean, his posture slightly bent with age. He didn't react like the others. There was no visible shock, no dramatic expression. Instead, he watched quietly, as if he understood something the others didn't. The guitarist noticed him. Not with his eyes, but with instinct. The man didn't drop money into the case. He didn't speak. He simply sat down on the pavement a few feet away, ignoring the curious looks of others, and closed his eyes and listened. For the first time since he had started, the guitarist faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, because that was different. That wasn't curiosity. That wasn't entertainment. That was recognition. The melody shifted, almost unconsciously, becoming softer, more intimate. The kind of music that isn't meant for crowds, but for one person who truly hears it. The guitarist's fingers moved with a new kind of emotion, one that even he hadn't planned to reveal. And something inside him cracked. Not visibly, not dramatically, but deeply, because beneath the layers of this prank, beneath the experiment, there was truth he couldn't escape. He remembered the nights when music was the only thing he had, the moments when applause filled empty spaces in his heart, but never quite enough. The realization that somewhere along the way he had lost the very reason he started playing, not for fame, not for recognition, but to feel, to connect, to remind people they weren't alone. The final note lingered in the air longer than it should have, trembling slightly before fading into silence. No one moved, no one spoke. And then, slowly, the sound of clapping began, not loud, not overwhelming, but genuine. It spread like a ripple, soft at first, then growing until the entire small crowd was applauding. All except the older man. He simply opened his eyes and nodded. That single nod carried more weight than all the applause combined. The guitarist looked up for the first time. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the prank stopped being a prank. It became something else entirely. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their routines, carrying with them a piece of something they couldn't quite explain. Some left money, some left smiles, some left in silence, their thoughts louder than anything they could say. But the older man stayed. Eventually, he stood up slowly, brushing dust from his hands. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He reached into his pocket and placed something in the guitar case. Not coins, not bills, but something small and folded. Then he walked away. The guitarist waited until the man disappeared into the crowd before picking it up. It was a piece of paper. Worn at the edges, carefully folded, he opened it. Inside, written in slightly shaky handwriting, were just a few words. Don't forget why you started. That was it. No name, no explanation. No praise, just a reminder. And somehow it hit harder than anything else that day. Because it wasn't about the disguise. It wasn't about the reactions. It wasn't about shocking people. It was about him, about what he had become, and what he still could be. He sat there for a long time after the street returned to normal, the guitar resting quietly in his lap. The city noise slowly crept back in, filling the space that his music had once held. But something had changed. Something real. He looked around, not as a performer observing an audience, but as a person seeing other people. Truly seeing them, the tired faces, the hurried steps, the quiet struggles hidden behind everyday routines. For the first time in a long time, he felt connected, not above them, not separate from them, but part of them. He picked up the guitar again, not for the crowd, not for the video, not for the prank, but for himself. The melody that followed wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was honest, and somehow that made it more powerful than anything he had played before. If this story is touching your heart right now, if it's reminding you of something you may have forgotten in your own life, take a moment to like, comment, and share. Your support helps stories like this reach people who might need them the most. And before this story ends, here's something special. Drop a comment saying, "I still believe in kindness," if you're someone who hasn't given up on humanity. Because stories like this only matter if people like you keep believing. As the sun began to dip, casting golden light across the street, the guitarist finally stood up. He packed his instrument slowly, carefully, as if acknowledging that this moment mattered more than any stage he had ever played on. He looked down at the worn piece of paper one last time before slipping it into his pocket. Don't forget why you started. He wouldn't. Not anymore. Because sometimes it takes losing yourself completely to finally find what truly matters. And sometimes the greatest performance isn't the one that shocks people, it's the one that changes you forever. The night didn't end when the crowd disappeared. It began. Long after the last footsteps faded and the city lights flickered on, he remained there, standing in the same spot where everything had quietly changed. The cold had settled in, creeping through his worn coat, but for the first time he didn't feel it the same way. Something warmer had taken its place, something unfamiliar, yet deeply human. He walked slowly through the streets, still in disguise, carrying the weight of the guitar on his back and the weight of that single sentence in his chest. Don't forget why you started. It echoed louder now, not as a reminder, but as a question. When did he forget? There was a time when music wasn't about perfection. When he played in small rooms on broken chairs for people who didn't care about fame or status. Back then, every note had meaning. Every chord felt like a conversation. But somewhere along the way, between sold-out arenas and flashing cameras, something had shifted. He had become brilliant, but he had stopped being real. That realization didn't hit him all at once. It unfolded slowly, painfully, like peeling away layers he didn't even know were there. Though each step he took through the city felt heavier, as if he were walking not just through streets, but through memories. He passed a small cafe where a young boy sat outside, clumsily strumming a cheap guitar. The chords were off. The rhythm was broken. But the boy's face, it was alive, focused. Full of something pure, the guitarist stopped without thinking. He watched silently, unnoticed, as the boy struggled through a simple melody, repeating it again and again, refusing to give up despite the mistakes. There was no audience, no applause, no expectation, just effort, just passion, just passion, just heart. And suddenly it hit him harder than anything else that day. That was him. Or at least, it used to be. He didn't approach the boy, he didn't correct him or reveal himself. He simply stood there, absorbing the moment like someone starving for something they had long been deprived of. Whoa. Then, quietly, he walked away. But this time, he wasn't running from something. He was moving toward something. The next morning, everything was supposed to go back to normal. The video footage had already been captured. The reactions were priceless. The prank had worked beyond expectations. His team was excited. They talked about edits, titles, viral potential, millions of views. But when they found him, something was different. He wasn't celebrating, he wasn't even smiling. He sat in silence, the guitar resting beside him, his eyes distant but clear. They showed him clips, people gasping, whispering, applauding, the two girls covering their mouths in disbelief, the small crowd gathering, the moment the music stopped the street. A perfect, someone said. A viral, another added. But he shook his head, not in disagreement, in understanding. Understanding. Because for them it was content. For him it had become truth. Days passed, but the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. Louder, more impossible to ignore. He found himself avoiding the stage, avoiding the spotlight, avoiding everything that once defined him. Because now it felt incomplete. He returned to the streets, not for a video, not for an audience, but for answers. This time without cameras, without a team, without an agenda, just him and the guitar. He chose different corners, different neighborhoods, different moments. Sometimes he played softly, almost like a whisper. Sometimes he played with intensity, pouring everything he had into each note. And each time the reactions were different. Some people stopped, some didn't, some listened deeply. Some barely noticed, but none of that mattered anymore. Because he wasn't playing for them, he was playing with them, among them, as one of them. And slowly something inside him began to heal. Not instantly, not dramatically, but genuinely. He started noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The tired worker who paused just long enough to breathe. The mother who smiled despite exhaustion. The old man who listened with closed eyes, as if holding on to memories only he could feel. Music became a bridge again. Not a performance, a connection. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in fading shades of gold and orange, he found himself back in the same street where it had all begun. The same wall, the same pavement, the same space where the first chord had stopped time. He sat down. No disguise this time. No disguise this time. Just himself, and he began to play. The sound was different now. Not technically, he was still flawless, but emotionally it carried something new. Something deeper, something honest. People stopped again, not because they were shocked, but because they felt it. Among the crowd, he noticed familiar reactions, the quiet stillness, the curious glances, the gradual gathering of strangers drawn together by something invisible yet undeniable. But this time, he wasn't looking for reactions. He was looking for meaning. And then, as if the world had come full circle, he saw him. The older man, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching. Their eyes met again, but this time, there was no disguise, no hidden identity. Just two people who understood something that didn't need words. The guitarist didn't stop playing, but his music changed. It softened, deepened, opened, and for a moment, everything else faded away again. When the final note lingered and disappeared into silence, there was no immediate applause, just that same fragile stillness, the kind that feels almost sacred. Then slowly, people began to clap. Duh! Not loudly, but meaningfully. The older man stepped forward. This time, he didn't sit. He didn't leave a note. He simply placed his hand gently on the guitar for a brief second, just enough to be felt. and then nodded once more. But this nod was different. It wasn't a reminder. It was approval. A quiet acknowledgement that he had found his way back, and as the man turned and walked away, disappearing once again into the rhythm of the city, the guitarist understood something he hadn't before. Some people don't enter your life to stay. They enter to change you forever. He stood there surrounded by strangers who no longer felt like strangers, holding a guitar that no longer felt like just an instrument. It felt like purpose. If this story has stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, something deeper than just entertainment, take a moment right now to share and comment. Because stories like this only matter when they're felt and shared. Because at the end of the day, it was never about shocking people. It was about waking up. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one person, one simple sentence to remind you who you really are.